Russia is running out of airplanes. Yep, you heard that one right. One of the largest powers in the world is at risk of running out of airplanes. You might be wondering, what on earth does that mean? How can a country, especially one with as many resources as Russia, just run out of airplanes? Historically, Russia has been a leader in the aeronautics industry, especially when it comes to fighter jets. So what happened? How did this technological superpower run its plane industry into the ground? Let's take a look. Around early 1939, Russia created the MiG Design Bureau, part of the larger institution MiG Aircraft Building Corporation. The bureau is also part of a state-owned multi-firm aerospace complex, which has its headquarters in Moscow. The bureau was founded when Soviet leader Joseph Stalin ordered prominent aviation designer Nikolai Polikarpov to develop a new military fighter. However, during World War II, Germany did not mount many strategic bombing raids against the Soviet Union, so MiG interceptors rarely saw action in their primary role. Only in the post-war era did the Design Bureau grow in size and influence. Since its formation at the start of the Second World War, the MiG Design Bureau has been involved in roughly 250 different aircraft projects, of which 120 models reached construction. Since 1939, MiG's main manufacturing plant in Moscow has built over 15,000 aircraft, and by the start of the 21st century, MiG designs accounted for roughly 20% of the world's fighter aircraft. More fighter aircraft were in service than any other type of aircraft. MiG and the Sukhoi Design Bureau share the Russian fighter market equally. However, MiG faced hard times during the 1990s, prompting it to start an intense marketing campaign in the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe. MiG also began to diversify, venturing into the civilian market by making passenger planes. Russia has long been a leader in aircraft technology and aviation. Now you might wonder what expertise Russia has in developing such technology and how it became such an aviation superpower. After World War II, technology captured from the Germans allowed the Russians to fast-track their aircraft research and development efforts and produce the first Soviet jet fighter, known as the MiG-9, which had its first flight in 1946. Years later, during the Cold War, some of the USSR's most notable high-speed jet fighters, including the MiG-15, were deployed between the mid-1940s and early 1950s. The MiG-15 shocked Western forces during the Korean War with its speed and agility, cementing the Design Bureau as one of the greats of the military aeronautics industry. The MiG-17, which followed, reached supersonic speeds in test runs. Meanwhile, the MiG-19 was the first mass-produced Soviet supersonic fighter, and the MiG-21 could move about twice the speed of sound. The MiG Design Bureau created over 9,000 MiG-21s in 32 different versions for the Soviet Union Air Force and 40 other countries. In China, the Bureau licensed a version to be produced. The sophisticated MiG-23 Interceptor, the first Soviet operational variable-wing jet fighter, as was the MiG-25 Interceptor, which could go at 3 times the speed of sound, were created in the 1960s. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Design Bureau was largely restructured. To survive the very strained post-communist economy of Russia, the MiG turned mainly toward exporting sales of modernized versions of the MiG-29 as the company continued to advance fighter concepts. You might be wondering, what exactly are these planes? How do fighter planes actually work? Fighter planes are built to allow aircraft to secure control of airspace by destroying enemy aircraft in combat. These fighter planes were meant to outfly and outmaneuver opposing fighters. To fully understand Russia's predicament, with its lack of airplanes and strains on resources, it's crucial to turn to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. For about 3 years now, Russia's been occupying and waging a war against Ukraine. Russia has fully mobilized itself politically, industrially, and militarily. However, the mobilization in Ukraine has depleted resources at a rate that cannot be renewed so fast, as many of Russia's stocks of Cold War-era weapons have been drained. Because Ukrainian tactics are superior in many ways, Ukrainian formations have been able to defeat much larger Russian formations. At the same time, Republican allies of Russia in the U.S. House of Representatives have withheld much of the aid necessary for Ukraine to meet its urgent military and financial needs. So, though Ukrainian tactics have been straining Russian resources in combat, Ukrainian forces often fall short due to a lack of ammunition and other essential resources. Currently, along the nearly 600-mile front line of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, Ukrainians have been able to defeat most Russian attacks, causing catastrophic casualties for under-equipped Russian assault groups. Why are the Russians under-equipped, you might wonder? Russia's strange process for plane manufacturing, coupled with its reliance on foreign parts, limited access to some needed parts, and cannibalization of old planes have all contributed to diminishing returns. But more on that later. Anyways, the Russians have continued to advance against Ukraine, and the one person with the power to stop the Russians' continued occupation of Ukraine. Because of the lack of American-made missiles in Ukraine, Russia's missiles and bombs have been attacking the biggest cities in Ukraine, including Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa, which are becoming increasingly defenseless. 600 Ukrainian civilians, including children, were killed by Russian airstrikes in March 2024 in just one of the countless atrocities faced by Ukrainians as Russia continues to advance. But Russia's continued advances against Ukraine might eventually lead to its own demise. Keep that in mind as we look at the current status of Russia's planes and other weapons. Let's take a look at what the Russian military has been working with since it first attacked Ukraine. In just 26 months of attacking Ukraine, Russia's military lost over 15,300 tanks, fighting vehicles, artillery, and various other weapons. Russia's also lost hundreds of thousands of troops, while Ukraine has managed to have just a third of Russia's losses. American intelligence estimated that Russia has lost 87% of the troops it started the invasion of Ukraine with over 300,000 killed or injured. Two-thirds of its tanks were also destroyed as of February. The Russian Aerospace Forces, also known as the VKS, possessed about 900 tactical aircraft divided into fighter, attack, and fighter-bomber aircraft before the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Between then and August 2023, Russia lost between 84 and 130 of them to air defenses, crashes, and enemy fighter aircraft. Nonetheless, Russia continues its occupation of Ukraine with forces that are larger than ever. Its army is actually currently 15% larger than when it first invaded Ukraine, increasing its frontline troop strength over the past year from its 360,000 to 470,000 troops. The Russian military has drafted over 300,000 men beginning in late 2022 and has offered bonuses for volunteers. Brigades have curtailed basic training for new recruits, shipping fresh forces off to the front lines. The lack of preparation of new Russian troops has led to even quicker deaths on the front lines. A recent Estonian Defense Ministry study claims that killing 100,000 Russians would permanently damage or maybe collapse the Kremlin's mobilization. And if the numbers coming from the front lines are accurate, Ukraine could kill as many as 3 times that this year. The losses Russia is facing are unsustainable, both in terms of men and vehicles. The Russian vehicle industry produces between 500 and 600 tanks and possibly more than 1,000 or other new fighting vehicles annually. The military averages a loss of 1,000 tanks and 2,000 fighting vehicles every year. And with its occupation of Ukraine, Russia is only losing more and more of its weapons and vehicles. Now, you might ask, how does the Kremlin meet the gap in the vehicles each year? Russia's had to resort to mobilizing old Soviet tanks and fighting vehicles from the 50s through to the 70s that they had rusting away in storage. Estonian soldier and analyst Artur Rehi writes that time is running out for Russia, as recent projections suggest that by mid-2025, there may not be any old tanks and fighting vehicles left in storage. Due to the shortage of combat vehicles, Russians have had to resort to sending troops into battle in unarmored freight trucks. In late 2023, the Russian army acquired 2,100 Chinese Desert Cross 1003 all-terrain vehicles, which are basically heavy-duty golf carts. These golf carts obviously don't last long in combat with Ukrainian anti-tank missile teams and skilled drone operators, but Ukraine's lack of ammunition has caused the country's forces to retreat when they could have otherwise held with enough firepower. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, who was impeached in 2019 for attempting to coerce Ukrainian officials to support a smear campaign targeting Trump's political opponents, has called on Ukraine to surrender portions of its land to Russia. The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Johnson, Trump's political ally, has been withholding ammunition and funding from Ukraine. But what's the deal with planes in particular? Why is Russia's aviation industry facing so many issues? Early 2024 has not been kind to Russia's aviation industry. Within commercial and military aviation alike, concerns over available planes, access to spare parts, and safety and maintenance are paramount. However, Ukraine recently focused on Russia's very powerful and exceptionally expensive spy planes, and has been very successful so far. Since the start of the current year, Kyiv has taken out at least 2 of Russia's rare Bereev A-50 airborne warning and control aircraft. The planes are used to help Russia monitor Ukraine's air defenses. One A-50 was taken out over the Sea of Azov in mid-January 2024, while another was taken out by the Ukrainian Air Force in late February. The A-50s generally fly with a crew of as many as 15 personnel and can cost over $300 million to produce per plane. The Russian military currently uses a modernized version of the aircraft known as the A-50U, which replaces the original craft's analog systems with digital systems that can track signals and detect targets more quickly. With the 6 planes Russia has, they're able to have A-50s airborne, providing air defense and early warning around the clock. But the loss of even one more could be catastrophic. Ukraine has also evidently targeted an aviation facility in the city of Taganrog in Russia that was meant to repair A-50s. Reports say there was a massive drone strike in the Rostov region, but no damage to city infrastructure. However, the aircraft facility close to the city was targeted, and the plant was heavily damaged. The A-50 aircraft near the facility was either destroyed or may have experienced significant damage. Russia is believed to have no more than 6 A-50s left at its disposal, and losing another would mean Russia would be unable to maintain its constant 24/7 operations. Some reports indicate Moscow might revive old A-50 airframes to increase its fleet of operational planes. This follows the trend of using old, previously unused or outdated equipment, as seen with the tanks. A-50s are generally equipped with powerful radars that operate outside the frequency of typical cameras and can recognize the movements of land and air vehicles in a single sweep. By losing A-50s, Russia's capabilities to conduct radar reconnaissance of Ukrainian territory have declined, as has its ability to detect air targets and radar systems. According to reports from Ukraine's military, the Kremlin seeks to replace the A-50s with reconnaissance drones, with limited success. Russia kept its replacement A-50 operating over Russian territory after losing its first in 2024 to prevent losing another aircraft. But after the second was shot down, Russia grounded its planes for some time. The reconnaissance drones Russia is attempting to use may provide crucial intel in the absence of A-50s. Russia is likely using a combination of well-known drones like the Orlan 10 and the larger Orlan 30. The goal of the drones is to collect and convey information that the A-50 otherwise would have. However, even if equipped with radar, these drones lack the size and the power to provide comparable radar coverage to that of the A-50s. While no one drone can provide the same capabilities that the planes once had, different drones flown at varying altitudes could fill in some of the gaps left by the losses of the A-50s. Ukraine's Air Force has allegedly shot down many Iranian-made Shahed drones that Russia has deployed recently, so it remains to be seen how successful the tactic will be. Replacing airborne early warning systems with unmanned drones or other vehicles requires years of development, time, and resources, and likely won't provide the capabilities of large airborne radar. For now, drones just provide some support in an area where Russia is seriously lacking, given its declining aviation industry. It's not just Ukrainian targeting causing the collapse of fighter jets, however. Overuse of these aircraft has also cost Russia lots of money and resources as the war continues. At the start of combat, total combat power from all areas is crucial, but as the war drags on, forces try to exhaust one another. At this point in the conflict, the total longevity of the military is what matters. In fact, one study suggests the extra hours of use that Russia has forced its aircraft to perform since February of 2022 has cost an additional 27 to 57 aircraft in imputed losses. But what does that actually mean? Well, aircraft have lifespans. They don't last forever. Planes are designed to have a total number of expected flight hours, which should be used evenly throughout the life of the aircraft and should have routine maintenance and inspections. If an aircraft was designed for, say, 3,000 flight hours with an anticipated use of 30 years, the aircraft would fly about 100 hours a year. If the wear is more or less than expected upon inspection, the projected remaining hours are adjusted accordingly. The lifespans of planes are used to plan around fuel procurement, ground maintenance, pilot training, and more. At present, the VKS is still working on transitioning from Soviet-era aircraft to more modern platforms, so newer tactical aircraft typically join the force at a rate of between 18 and 36 planes per year. Currently, about half of the VKS force is upgraded Soviet-era airframes. Newer Russian aircraft have a capacity of between 3,500 and 4,500 flight hours, though some are as high as 6,000 hours. On the other hand, the older Soviet-era planes were only meant to be in the Air Force for 2,000 to 3,500 hours on average. Some aircraft, like the MiG-31, have been upgraded to extend their service life, but many planes including the Su-24, 25, 27, and MiG-29 are nearing the end of their service lives, with at best between 500 and 1,000 hours left. Imputed losses means the Russian military has burned through more of the expected lifespan of the aircraft more quickly than they anticipated, so they need to obtain more aircraft. increase maintenance, reduce operations, and/or decrease the size of their force to account for this. At the start of the war, the VKS was flying as much as 150 to 300 sorties a day, compared to the average of 60 a day during times of peace. Even though it's since dropped to 100 sorties a day, the VKS has essentially flown double its normal annual hours since the start of the war. The extra use is equivalent to losing about 34 aircraft since the invasion first took place. But this is only capturing losses relative to the lifespan of newer airframes. Older airframes with fewer remaining hours means the actual loss might be closer to losing roughly 57 airframes. However, the exact composition of the VKS force and the plane's ages and the historical use aren't known. Some tactical aircraft aren't even working in Ukraine, but instead are used for training or harassing NATO aircraft. This could mean that even the estimate of 57 airframes is likely an underestimation. True losses might be closer to 187 VKS airframes, and so VKS can be expected to lose between 30 and 60 airframes a year from combat, accidents, and imputed losses. If things continue as is, engineers project that combat losses and imputed flight hour losses could put the VKS below 75% of its pre-war strength, requiring it to increase production, reduce usage, or reduce force structure for 3 decades. Overall, it's clear that overuse is a significant contributor to the loss of military airplanes since the start of the war. However, it's not just the technology that Russia seems to be lacking. Russia also might have run out of pilots. The destruction of Russian warships and fighter jets has suggested Russia's military cannot defend itself against Western missiles, and experienced pilots seem to be lacking as well. The recent sinking of Russia's Novocherkassk warship and the destruction of Sukhoi fighter jets suggests an abundance of inexperienced Russian pilots who do not understand how to fight more experienced, seasoned pilots. Russia's transition from a socialist to a market economy has caused vast economic dislocation in Russia in recent years. Thousands of Western corporations have fled the country after Putin's invasion, with assets sold in a fire sale or nationalized outright. Russia's economy has become less modern, with new cars lacking anti-lock brakes and airbags. At the same time, its Western-made planes have been at the risk of failure because of the lack of new parts available in Russia. While fighter planes are becoming increasingly difficult to access and produce in Russia, commercial planes are experiencing similar failures and shortages. In just 1 year, Russia's rate of plane malfunctions tripled as a result of Western sanctions that were imposed on Putin's war in Ukraine that impacted the aviation industry. In recent months, Russian domestic passenger planes have repeatedly required emergency landings driven by technical issues due to a lack of spare parts. From September to December 2023, Russia experienced 60 commercial aviation incidents involving emergency landings, engine fires, and malfunctions. Planes faced many technical issues requiring them to abandon their intended routes. From January to August 2023, over 120 air accidents were reported in Russia, all of which were with civil aircraft used by Russian airlines. In 2023, the total number of plane malfunctions reached over 180. In comparison, between 2018 and 2022, only 55 accidents on average were reported annually during the same months. In 2023, engine issues accounted for about a third of incidents, and landing gear accounted for a quarter of such accidents. Brakes, flaps, air conditioning systems, and windshields also experienced issues during 2023. One Russian plane's engine caught fire during takeoff in Ulan-Ude in Buryatia, and another caught fire at Baikal International Airport. Reports of sudden cancellations and delays at Moscow airports have raised concerns about plane safety. According to the Russian Transport Ministry's plan for developing the aviation industry, the country plans to gradually reduce its use of foreign aircraft and find ways to substitute Western-made parts by 2030. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, flight safety incidents have more than doubled in Russia. One report says that in 2023, 81 cases of flight safety concerns arose, rising from 37 in 2022. But what's been causing these widespread malfunctions? Why does Russia now need to find alternatives to supplement its once abundant supply of planes? The United States government sanctioned Russian-operated planes, which has caused aircraft manufacturers to stop delivering spare parts and new planes to Russia. Spare parts not certified by aircraft manufacturers have been installed on aircraft, posing serious safety risks. Some of those sanctions include closing US, EU, and other allied airspaces to Russian planes, preventing Boeing, Airbus, and other plane makers from sending spare parts to Russia, and stopping countries like Turkey from refueling Russian planes. The goal of the sanctions in the West was to punish Vladimir Putin and to cut Russia off from the rest of the world. Both the US and the EU have also demanded the return of aircraft leased to Russia, though the Kremlin has encouraged carriers to re-register the aircraft in Russia to get around this. Because of this, Russian planes continue to fly without receiving crucial software updates and mandatory maintenance checks to guarantee airworthiness. Russia has continued to aim to bypass the sanctions and has sought out substitutes for Western-made parts, trying to keep its aviation industry airborne with a little success. Some reports indicate that Russia has lost a whopping 76 passenger jets since February 2022 due to Western sanctions preventing them from sourcing necessary parts. Since the war started, the effect of sanctions has been immense on Russian air travel. In just a few days, Russian airlines lost international destinations, technical support for foreign planes, leasing contracts, insurance, foreign software, partnerships with outside carriers, and more. Russia now faces pressure to become self-contained by 2030 or else continue to risk severe and ongoing detriment to its aviation industry. Western plane makers, including Airbus and Boeing, have halted supplies, services, and spare parts since March 2022. Regular maintenance support also ended for Russian airlines. But the Kremlin has countered with its own sanctions, including seizing about 500 leased Western-built airliners. One estimate suggests the value of those planes is as high as $10 billion. Despite attempts to reclaim these seized planes, most leasers have had to forfeit their planes due to airspace restrictions and pushback from the Russian government and its airlines. How is Russia's economy faring with so many sanctions in place? Can the aviation industry in Russia withstand the vast devastation? To maintain its aviation industry, the country has allocated over $12 billion in state subsidies and loans. While Russia aims to develop its aviation sector using domestically sourced parts, it also resorts to purchasing aircraft from foreign lessors to prevent further seizures. However, acquiring the necessary parts for Russian planes is expensive. Before the conflict in Ukraine and subsequent Western sanctions, foreign companies supplied spare navigation systems and other vital components to Russia in case of malfunction. These parts could carry hefty price tags, sometimes exceeding $250,000 each. Russia's recent spending on aviation is almost twice the amount spent on aviation during the COVID-19 pandemic, when air travel was drastically reduced. Russia aims to produce over 1,000 planes by the end of the decade. Currently, Russian airliners operate 991 aircraft, 405 of which were produced domestically. The money Russia's been putting into its airline industry has had far-reaching economic impacts, impacting even reserve funds. According to the data, Russia spent 110 billion rubles in 2022 on compensating airliners for loss resulting from the rise in jet fuel costs. And in 2023, the National Wealth Fund faced even greater losses, with over 400 billion rubles spent on aviation that year. This amount of spending is equivalent to about 1% of the country's gross domestic product, or GDP, for 2023. And Russia spent 2.3 trillion rubles between 2022 and 2023 on other transportation outside of aviation. One strategic spending document suggests Russia must spend at least 711 billion rubles, equivalent to almost $8 billion, to achieve technological independence from foreign suppliers. Russia's main economic goals for its aviation industry is focusing on supporting sales, expanding production capacity, and creating a post-sales service system. However, Putin may have other concerns when it comes to aviation. With the recent Russian election, Putin may have felt a sense of electoral and reputational pressure, with the threat of a collapsing aviation industry looming overhead. Analysts say that Russia's investments will at best keep its fleet flying, but Russia will probably not see its aircraft return to Western markets anytime soon. This is likely the case even if the war in Ukraine ends. The bureaucracy and the economic costs of rebuilding an entire fleet of planes with traceable safety records and approved parts will likely take a substantial amount of time and money to achieve. Russia's manufacturing and upkeep of its planes are likely behind the malfunctions and emergency landings that seem to be increasing in frequency. Russia has not only imported foreign parts from countries outside where the planes were manufactured, but the country has also been cannibalizing old planes for parts that could be used on the aircraft. The way planes have been made in recent years, especially jets like the Airbus A350, A320neo, or the Boeing 737 MAX and 787, all have technology that must be consistently updated. Many parts have limited lifespans that must be replaced regularly. As of 2022, a whopping 80% of Russia's commercial aircraft fleet were Boeings and Airbuses, which are not produced in Russia. Russia's ability to keep Western jets in the air is impressive, though its rate of failures and functioning issues are clearly concerning. But how does Russia keep those jets flying without the parts it needs? While Russia has faced sanctions from the West, some of its allies have stepped in to support the oppressive Russian campaign of occupation in Ukraine. Countries like China, Iran, and North Korea have aligned with Russia to allow the occupation of Ukraine to continue. Smuggling has also been a major source of parts. Russia received over $14 million of US-made aircraft parts through the black market in 2022. For one, Russia has imported spare parts from third-party countries outside the EU and the US without the manufacturer's consent, in this case mostly Boeing and Airbus. Between May 2022, just after Russia invaded Ukraine, and August 2023, an estimated $1.2 billion worth of aircraft parts still reached Russian airlines directly for maintenance. Even more have been shipped to other companies within Russia. Russia has sought equipment and parts, either from foreign countries or its own old planes, including essential parts to keep the jets airworthy, including wing flaps, cabin pressure valves, landing gear, and cockpit displays. However, mundane spare parts items like flight attendant telephone handsets, toilet seats, and even coffee makers are also important to replace. Where exactly is Russia getting these parts from, you might ask? Customs records indicate that the parts have traveled to Russia through middlemen in countries like the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, China, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, which all have not endorsed Western sanctions on Russia. These alternate routes of acquiring spare parts have been said to reduce prices and delivery times on otherwise inaccessible foreign-made plane parts. However, for a long time, most countries in Asia and the Middle East that have not sanctioned Russia were still unwilling to provide supplies to Russia, fearing secondary sanctions from Western powers. Plus, the exports from foreign countries that are not directly from the manufacturers can cause some safety concerns. For instance, Northrop Grumman, a plane manufacturer, did not identify any sales or repair services by the company to any Russian entities since the sanctions took place. The United States government also reported that American and other Western export controls have been able to root out and disrupt illicit networks and engage with industry and other foreign governments to ensure there is compliance. The EU has also implemented systems to monitor, control, and block re-exports to Russia. Since the sanctions on Russia have been in place, Russia has turned to far smaller suppliers for the parts it needs. For instance, when maintenance company Lufthansa Technik of Germany stopped supporting Russian planes, some Russian carriers were forced to turn to smaller suppliers. S7 Engineering, for instance. The S7 Engineering Maintenance Unit had to start importing parts from a Moldova company called Air Rock Solutions. Over 14 months, S7 received at least $1.23 million in Air Rock parts, according to customs records. Some of Russia's greatest struggles include challenges with the A350 and Bombardier Q series. Since maintenance on these aircraft is traditionally carried out overseas, it's harder for many planes to be repaired in a timely manner, if at all. Clearly, the importation of foreign parts has kept Russia's aviation industry afloat, but uncertainties around the quality of said parts and the safety of the planes pose urgent concerns for many. How else does Russia keep its planes flying amidst the sanctions from the West and a crumbling industry? Well, let's take a look. Not only has Russia relied on foreign parts to keep its planes flying, but some airlines have also stripped airplanes for parts, cannibalizing old planes. By August 2022 alone, at least one Russian-made Sukhoi Superjet 1000 and one Airbus A350, both of which were operated by Aeroflot, were grounded and disassembled to provide spare parts and maintenance support for running planes. The Airbus 350 at the time of cannibalization was almost brand new. Equipment was also taken around that time from some Boeing 737s and Airbus A320s to provide spare parts for other planes of those models. As Russian carriers have begun flying fewer routes due to Western sanctions, many jets have been left unused and grounded, which can then be stripped for parts. The robbing of spare parts of planes, which may have resulted in a Frankenstein fleet being worthless outside of Russia, which has caused lessors to write off the aircraft, doubting they'll ever be returned. The potential of unairworthy parts and equipment further establishes serious safety risks. Once airline inventory gets low, carriers may even encourage pilots and mechanics to purposefully overlook certain repairs, which Aeroflot apparently did earlier in the year. As Russia continues to face sanctions and condemnation from many Western nations, it faces a crucial choice. As Western allies finally deliver F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, Russia's Air Force faces an even greater threat of destruction. Not to mention the aviation sector in Russia, both commercial and military, is crumbling from within due to overuse, sanctions necessitating cannibalization of old planes, and imported foreign parts, as well as other things. As long as the violence and occupation in Ukraine persist, Russia's aircraft shortage will continue. And with only so many old reserves to draw from, the Kremlin has limited options for fighter jets and other military weaponry moving forward. At this point, Russia must choose: continue to occupy Ukraine and further isolate itself from Western countries as its aviation industry declines, or end the violence and stop the war. Now check out analyzing Russia's massive failures in war against Ukraine, or watch this video instead.